Ambassador Sarah Chun smiled warmly at the assembled delegates of the Galactic Council. Her voice carried the careful tone of someone who had practiced diplomacy for decades. She spoke slowly, making sure the translation devices could keep up with every word. "The Terran Republic stands firmly with the Council's decision," she said. "We believe that dialogue, not violence, will bring the Zelthran Empire back to reason. Sanctions and negotiations are the tools of civilized species." The other ambassadors nodded approvingly. The avian representative clicked his beak in agreement. The crystalline Lithans hummed their approval. Even the massive Kurlath delegate, who stood nearly 3 meters tall, rumbled something positive in his deep voice. That Sarah had given them exactly what they wanted to hear. Humans were peaceful. Humans were reasonable. Humans could be trusted to follow the rules. The meeting ended after another 2 hours of debate that led nowhere. Sarah gathered her papers, shook hands with several delegates, and made small talk about an upcoming cultural festival. She laughed at a joke from the avian ambassador. She promised to attend a dinner party next week. She was the picture of diplomatic grace. Back in the human embassy, Sarah's smile vanished the moment the door closed behind her. She walked quickly to her private office, activated the signal jammer, and pulled out a secure communication device from a hidden drawer. "Chun to Phantom Command," she said quietly. "The Council has authorized sanctions only. No military intervention. You are cleared for Protocol 7. A voice responded, flat and emotionless. "Confirmed. Protocol 7 is active. Phantom Fleet is already in position." Sarah closed the channel and sat down heavily in her chair. She poured herself a glass of whiskey and stared at the amber liquid. The other species thought humans were soft. They thought humanity's relatively short time in the galactic community meant humans were still naive, still learning how things worked. They had no idea how wrong they were. The Zelthran Empire had spent the last 6 months expanding aggressively into neutral territory. They enslaved populations. They stripped worlds of resources. They experimented on captured aliens in laboratories that would have made Earth's worst monsters proud. The Council had debated in written reports and formed committees while millions suffered and died. That was the Council's way. Talk, debate, form consensus. By the time they acted, the crisis was usually over, one way or another. Humans had learned to work within that system. Publicly, they followed every rule, signed every treaty, and praised every resolution. Privately, they did what needed to be done. 3 days after the Council meeting, a Zelthran listening post on the edge of their territory stopped transmitting. The station had been monitoring ship movements in the sector, gathering intelligence for the Empire's next wave of expansion. One moment it was broadcasting routine updates. The next moment, silence. The Zelthran military sent a patrol to investigate. When they arrived, they found the station intact but empty. No bodies, no signs of struggle, no indication of weapon fire. The entire crew of 47 soldiers had simply vanished. Even stranger, the station's logs had been wiped completely. Not corrupted or damaged, but surgically removed, as if someone had carefully extracted exactly what they wanted and left everything else untouched. The patrol commander sent an urgent report to headquarters. This was no equipment malfunction. This was an attack. But by whom and how? A week later, another station went dark. Then a military outpost. Then a supply depot. Each time, the pattern was the same. No warning. No distress call. No evidence. Just empty facilities and missing personnel. The Zelthran Empire began to panic. They pulled ships from their expansion fleets to guard their installations. They increased patrols. They installed better sensors and communication systems. Nothing helped. Every few days, another facility would go silent. Rumors spread through the Zelthran military. Some said it was ghosts. Others claimed it was a secret weapon developed by one of the Council species. A few whispered about black ships with no markings. Ships that appeared on sensors for just a moment before vanishing again. At the next Galactic Council meeting, the Zelthran ambassador stood and demanded answers. His scales were pale with fear, and his voice shook as he spoke. Someone is attacking our territory. Our people are disappearing. We demand the Council investigate this immediately. Ambassador Chun looked appropriately concerned. She folded her hands on her desk and spoke with genuine-sounding sympathy. This is troubling news indeed. The Terran Republic condemns any acts of violence or terrorism. We support a full investigation into these incidents. She paused, then added carefully, "Of course, we must also remember that the Zelthran Empire has made many enemies through its aggressive expansion. Perhaps this is retaliation from one of the populations you have conquered?" The Zelthran ambassador hissed in anger, but he couldn't argue with the logic. His people had enslaved dozens of species. Any one of them could be responsible. The Council voted to form an investigative committee. It would take at least 3 months to organize and deploy. Everyone knew that by then. The matter would likely resolve itself one way or another. Sarah returned to her embassy and sent another encrypted message. The Council is investigating. Maintain operational security. Continue Protocol 7. The response came back immediately. Understood. Next target is the Krath 7 facility. Sarah closed her eyes. The facility on Krath 7 was where the Zelthran conducted biological experiments on living subjects. The screams from that place reportedly never stopped. The Council knew about it. They had formed a subcommittee to study the issue. In 72 hours, Krath 7 would go silent, and those screams would finally end. That night, Sarah attended a diplomatic reception. She wore a beautiful dress, made small talk, and laughed at appropriate moments. She accepted congratulations on humanity's commitment to peace and justice. She posed for photographs with ambassadors from a dozen worlds, and far away, in the darkness between stars, ships with no names and no insignia moved silently toward their next target. Krixther had always been good at finding patterns. As a junior intelligence analyst for the Avian Concordat, his job was to read reports, compile data, and look for connections that others might miss. It was quiet work, the kind that happened in small offices far from the excitement of diplomacy or military operations. He had been reviewing reports about the Thaliamorphos Zelthran situation for 3 weeks when he noticed something odd. The facilities that were going silent weren't random. At first, they seemed scattered across Zelthran space with no clear pattern. But when Krixther started looking at what each facility actually did, a picture emerged. Every single target had been involved in atrocities. The listening post that went first had been responsible for identifying slave populations. The military outpost had processed prisoners for experimentation. The supply depot had stored chemical weapons used against civilian populations. The Krath 7th facility had been, according to leaked reports, a biological testing center where captive aliens were deliberately infected with diseases to study their effects. Krixther spread his wings nervously and pecked at his datapad. This couldn't be coincidence. Someone was deliberately targeting the worst of the Zelthran Empire's operations. Someone who knew exactly what each facility did and had the capability to strike without leaving evidence. He expanded his search, going back through 5 years of incident reports. He found more patterns. During the Korthian conflict, 3 warlords known for using child soldiers had disappeared without trace. During the Merchant Wars, pirate bases that dealt in slaves had been destroyed with unusual precision. In each case, the incidents happened while Galactic Council peacekeeping forces were present in the region. Human peacekeeping forces. Krixther felt his tail feathers fluff up in alarm. He triple-checked his data. The correlation was undeniable. Wherever humans served in peacekeeping operations, certain types of criminals simply vanished. Not arrested, not brought to trial, just gone. He thought about going to his supervisor immediately, but decided to dig deeper first. Using his security clearance, he accessed classified council archives. What he found made his blood run cold. There were incidents going back 30 years, to shortly after humanity joined the Galactic Council. A war criminal who had ordered the massacre of 1 million civilians disappeared from a high-security prison. A corporate executive responsible for environmental genocide was found dead in his luxury apartment, despite having a dozen guards. A terrorist leader who had bombed civilian transports simply vanished from his heavily fortified compound. In every case, human ships or personnel had been in the system. In every case, investigations found nothing. No evidence. No witnesses. No trails to follow. Crickster was so absorbed in his research that he didn't notice his supervisor, Director Shalfi, standing behind him until she spoke. "You found the pattern." He jumped, nearly falling off his perch. "Director, I was just—" the data suggested. Shalfi settled onto the perch beside him. She was older, her feathers graying at the edges, and she had worked in intelligence for 40 years. She looked at his screen without surprise. "I found the same pattern 20 years ago," she said quietly. "I brought it to my supervisor at the time. He told me the same thing I'm about to tell you." Crickster waited, his heart beating fast. "The humans have a saying," Shalfi continued. "They say that justice and the law are not always the same thing. The Galactic Council has laws, procedures, committees, and debates. We are very good at maintaining order among civilized species who agree to follow rules. But what about those who don't follow rules? What about the monsters who hide behind legal technicalities? What about the warlords in regions where we have no jurisdiction? We tried diplomatic pressure," Crickster said. Though his voice lacked conviction, Shalfi clicked her beak in something like laughter. "Diplomatic pressure. Tell me, Crickster, how many beings died in the Krath 7 facility while the Council formed a subcommittee to study the issue? How many species were enslaved while we debated sanctions?" Crickster didn't answer. "The humans do what we cannot," Shalfi said. "They maintain the appearance of civilization while doing the dark work that keeps actual civilization safe. They follow our rules in public. In private, they hunt the predators that our rules cannot touch. But that's illegal. It violates every principle of galactic law." "Yes," Shalfi agreed. "It does. And if you publish this research, if you bring it to the full council, there will be an enormous scandal. The humans might even be censured or expelled. And then what? Who will hunt the monsters? Will you? Will I? Will the Lithans, with their crystal bodies that shatter in combat? Will the Kurleth, who are too large to move quietly?" She fixed him with one bright eye. "The humans volunteered to be the galaxy's monsters, so the rest of us don't have to be. They dirty their hands so ours can stay clean. And they ask nothing in return except that we pretend not to notice." At that moment, across the galaxy, Ambassador Chen was attending another council meeting. The Zelthran ambassador was speaking frantically about ghost ships and unexplained disappearances. Other ambassadors made sympathetic noises, but offered no real help. Chun listened carefully, her face showing appropriate concern. When it was her turn to speak, she expressed humanity's support for the Zelthran people while gently reminding everyone that the Empire's aggressive policies had created many enemies. Back on his homeworld, Crickster stared at his datapad. He could expose this. He could show the Council what humanity was really doing. But as he looked at the list of facilities that had gone silent, he thought about what each one had done. He thought about the beings who had suffered in those places. He thought about the fact that in the 3 weeks since the attacks began, the Zelthran Empire had stopped expanding. They had even begun withdrawing from some of their more controversial conquests. "What do I do with this research?" he asked quietly. Shalfi reached over and pressed the delete key on his pad. "You forget about it. You go back to analyzing trade routes and ship movements. And if you're ever in a position to help humanity, you remember this moment. You remember that sometimes the most important truths are the ones we agree not to speak." That night, another Zelthran facility went dark. This one had been a training center for interrogators, the kind of place where aliens learn to extract information through pain and fear. When the Zelthran military arrived to investigate, they found it empty like all the others. But this time, they found something new. Written on a wall in several languages, including Zelthran, was a simple message. You were warned. No one knew who had written it or what the warning meant. But throughout Zelthran space, commanders began ordering their forces to pull back from the most aggressive operations. They shut down the facilities that even they knew were indefensible. They released some prisoners and ended some of their cruelest experiments, not because they wanted to, because they were afraid. The alien distress signal cut through normal communication channels like a knife. Every species in the galaxy heard it at the same moment. The message was simple and terrifying. They're coming. They don't stop. They don't negotiate. They consume everything. Warned as in silence, the signal had come from the Outer Rim, from a colony of peaceful traders who had never harmed anyone. The Galactic Council sent 3 ships to investigate. Only one returned, and it was badly damaged. The captain, a Lithan whose crystalline body bore cracks from stress, delivered his report in a shaking voice. There's nothing left. No buildings. No people. Even the plants are gone. The entire world has been stripped to bedrock. And we saw them. The ships. Thousands of them. They're heading toward the core. The Galactic Council had faced threats before, but nothing like this. The species called themselves the Korthak Swarm, though most species just called them the Swarm. They were a hive mind, billions of individuals controlled by a central consciousness. They had technology that rivaled or exceeded anything in Council space. And they had one purpose: consume and expand Dot within 3 months. 7 star systems fell. Trillions of beings died or were absorbed into the swarm. The Council mobilized its combined fleet, pulling ships from every member species. It was the largest military force ever assembled in galactic history. They met the swarm at the Helix Nebula. The battle lasted 18 hours. The Council fleet was destroyed. Of the 3,000 ships that entered the Helix Nebula, fewer than 200 escaped. The survivors brought stories of horror. Swarm ships that repaired themselves in the middle of battle. Boarding parties of creatures that seemed to feel no pain. Weapons that adapted to defenses in real time. The galaxy panicked. Species began evacuating their homeworlds. The council chambers, usually so orderly, became a chaos of shouting voices and desperate proposals. Some wanted to surrender. Some wanted to negotiate. Some wanted to run and hide in the deepest parts of space. Ambassador Chun sat quietly through it all. When the other ambassadors finally exhausted themselves, she stood up. The chamber fell silent. Everyone knew that humanity had the largest military of any single species, though most of that military had never been seen in action. Humans always sent their diplomatic ships to council functions, not their warships. The Terran Republic will fulfill its obligations to the Galactic Council, Chun said. Her voice was calm, but there was something in her eyes that made several ambassadors lean back in their seats. We will send our fleet. How many ships can you send? The Kurlith ambassador asked. We need thousands to replace what we lost. All of them, Chun replied. The Earth fleet that emerged from the Sol system was nothing like what the galaxy had seen before. Human diplomatic vessels were sleek and elegant, designed to look approachable and peaceful. These ships were different. They were angular, brutal things covered in weapons. No decorative elements. No artistic curves. Just armor, engines, and guns. There were 3,000 human warships, and they moved through space with a precision that suggested extensive training. The Council fleet had been a collection of different species with different tactics and different technologies. The human fleet moved like a single organism. The Avian Concordat sent Crixter, now promoted to security director, to observe the human fleet. His ship stayed well back as the humans took position at Threshold Station, the last major defense point before the core worlds. If the swarm broke through here, 10 billion beings would die in the first week. The swarm arrived 2 days later. Their fleet darkened the stars. There were tens of thousands of ships, perhaps hundreds of thousands. Sensors couldn't count them all. They moved forward in a wave that seemed endless. The human fleet didn't retreat. They advanced. Crixter watched in horror as human ships charged directly into the swarm formation. It seemed like suicide. The swarm would overwhelm them in minutes, but then the humans opened fire, and Crixter understood. Human weapons weren't designed for precision strikes or minimal collateral damage. They were designed to destroy. Missiles that could crack a moon. Energy beams that could boil oceans. Kinetic weapons that hit with the force of asteroids. Swarm ships died by the dozens, then by the hundreds. But they kept coming, and the humans kept advancing. When swarm ships got too close, human vessels rammed them. When human ships were too damaged to continue, they aimed themselves at swarm clusters and detonated their reactors. Crixter watched as human boarding teams launched themselves into space, using jump packs to board swarm vessels. They didn't wear the kind of void suits other species used. They wore armor that looked like it was designed for ground combat in hell itself. They cut their way into swarm ships and fought hand-to-hand with creatures that had claws like swords. The battle raged for 3 days. On the second day, Crixter watched a human cruiser take fire from a dozen swarm ships. The cruiser's engines died. Its weapons went offline. It drifted, helpless, toward a swarm carrier. Crixter thought the crew would abandon ship. Instead, the cruiser's emergency thrusters fired, adjusting its trajectory. It slammed into the carrier's main hull at maximum momentum. The explosion destroyed both ships and damaged a dozen others. On the third day, the swarm began to retreat. They had never retreated before. They had never shown fear. But they pulled back, leaving hundreds of destroyed ships behind. The human fleet pursued them, not to drive them away. To hunt them down, Ambassador Chun sent a message to the Galactic Council. The swarm will not be allowed to regroup. We will pursue them until the threat is eliminated. But your ships are damaged, the Kurloth ambassador protested. Your crews must be exhausted. We can send reinforcements. No, Chun interrupted. Stay and defend the core worlds. We'll handle this. The human fleet vanished into deep space, following the swarm. For weeks, the council heard nothing. Then reports started coming in from the outer rim. Human ships had found swarm breeding worlds and sterilized them. They had tracked swarm fleets to their staging areas and destroyed them. They weren't just fighting the swarm. They were hunting them too. Extinction. Crixter reviewed the battle recordings over and over. He watched human crews continue fighting even when their ships were falling apart. He watched them board swarm vessels, knowing they probably wouldn't return. He watched them sacrifice themselves without hesitation. He realized something that made his feathers stand on end. The humans at the council, the ambassadors like Sarah Chun, weren't pretending to be peaceful despite being warriors. They were warriors pretending to be peaceful. This was what they truly were. This was what they had always been, hidden behind smiles and handshakes and diplomatic language. Director Shalty found him in his office late one night, staring at his screens. "You understand now," she said softly. "They let us think they were weak," Crixter whispered. "They let us think they were like us, just another species trying to find their place in the galaxy. Would you have trusted them if you knew what they really were?" Shalty asked. Crixter had no answer. The war lasted another 8 months. The human fleet pursued the Korthak swarm through uncharted space, into dark regions where no council ship had ever ventured. Reports came back sporadically, carried by automated probes. The reports were clinical, detailed, and terrifying. The humans weren't just fighting the swarm, they were studying it. Every captured swarm ship was taken apart and analyzed. Every swarm world was examined before it was destroyed. Human scientists were learning how the hive mind worked, how swarm biology functioned, how their technology adapted dot, and then the humans started using that knowledge as a weapon. 3 months into the pursuit, swarm ships began to malfunction. Their communications broke down. Their coordination failed. Individual swarm ships started making irrational decisions, attacking their own forces or flying into stars. The humans had found a way to disrupt the hive mind itself. 5 months in, entire swarm fleets began dying of disease. Somehow, the humans had engineered a biological weapon that targeted swarm physiology. It spread through the hive mind like wildfire, killing billions of swarm creatures. Across dozens of systems, the galaxy watched these developments with a mixture of relief and horror. The swarm was being defeated, but the methods were brutal beyond anything the Council would have authorized. The humans were committing what amounted to genocide, and they were doing it efficiently, methodically, and without apparent remorse. Crixter compiled reports for the Concordat's military council. He tried to keep his analysis objective, but his hands shook as he wrote. The humans had saved the galaxy. They had also demonstrated capabilities that exceeded anything the Council possessed. They had biological weapons, psychological warfare techniques, and a willingness to do whatever was necessary to win. "They're monsters," one of the Concordat generals said after reading Crixter's report. "There are monsters," Director Shalty replied quietly. The final battle took place in the outer dark, in a region so far from Council space that it took 3 weeks for the news to arrive. The humans had tracked the swarm back to their origin point, a cluster of worlds where the original hive queens were spawning new generations. Instead of invading the worlds, the humans had done something that made the entire Council gasp in shock. They had collapsed the local star. The resulting supernova had sterilized every world in the system and sent radiation bursting outward in a sphere of death. Any swarm ships or worlds within 10 light years were destroyed. The humans had made sure the swarm could never return. The cost was high. Humanity had sent 3,000 ships on the campaign. Fewer than 800 returned. 2 million human soldiers and crew members had died. The galaxy owed humanity a debt that could never be repaid. The victory celebration was held on the Council's primary station. Every species sent representatives. There were speeches about unity and sacrifice, about the power of different species working together. The Karlith ambassador praised the bravery of all who had fought. The Lithan representative sang a memorial song for the dead. When it was Ambassador Chen's turn to speak, she walked to the podium with the same calm grace she always showed. She wore a simple uniform, not the elegant dresses she usually favored. There were shadows under her eyes. "The Terran Republic is honored to have served alongside our allies," she began. Her voice was steady, but there was something different about her now. The mask of perfect diplomacy had a few cracks in it. "We mourn our dead and celebrate our victory. We look forward to rebuilding and to continuing the peace we all cherish." She paused, and for just a moment, Something cold and hard showed in her eyes. And we hope that the galaxy will never again need to see what humanity becomes when we are pushed to the edge. The celebration continued for hours, but Crixter noticed something. The other ambassadors kept their distance from the human delegation. They were grateful, yes. They were appreciative. But they were also afraid. Late that night, Crixter found himself in a quiet observation deck with Director Shalthy. They watched human ships in the distance, sleek diplomatic vessels once again. The warships had been sent back to Sol System, back to whatever hidden bases and shipyards the humans maintained. "Do you think it's over?" Crixter asked. "The black ships? The secret operations?" Shalthy spread her wings and resettled them. "What do you think?" Crixter had been reviewing intelligence reports all week. There had been a pirate warlord in the frontier regions who had been using the chaos of the war to expand his territory. He had enslaved 3 colonies and was threatening more. Last night, his entire fleet had been destroyed. No one knew who had done it. "No," Crixter said quietly. "It's not over. They saved us from the swarm, but they won't stop being what they are. Would you want them to?" Shalthy asked. "The galaxy still has monsters in it. The swarm is gone, but there are pirates, slavers, tyrants, and worse. The council will go back to debating and forming committees. Someone has to do the dark work." "It should be subject to law," Crixter protested. "There should be oversight, accountability. Then the monsters would know when humans are coming," Shalthy replied. "They would prepare. They would hide. The system we have now works because the humans operate in shadows. The monsters fear what they cannot see." Crixter thought about the Zelthran Empire, which had peacefully withdrawn from most of its conquered territories after the war. He thought about the decrease in piracy over the last decade. He thought about the war criminals who had simply disappeared, one by one, without trials or public executions. He thought about the swarm and what might have happened if humanity had been as bound by procedure as every other council species. "I'm adding a new protocol to our security guidelines," Crixter said finally. "If anyone discovers evidence of unauthorized human operations, they are to report it to me directly. No one else. And what will you do with that evidence?" "Nothing," Crixter admitted. "But I want to know. Someone should know, even if we can't act on it." Shalthy clicked her beak in approval. "That's wisdom. The humans keep us safe. The least we can do is keep their secrets." On Earth, in a facility that officially didn't exist, a debriefing was taking place. The Phantom Fleet's surviving commanders sat around a table with military and intelligence officials. They discussed what had worked, what hadn't, and what lessons could be learned. "The swarm required full mobilization," one admiral said. "We couldn't hide what we are. The galaxy knows now." "They'll forget," another commander replied. "Or they'll convince themselves it was a special circumstance. Give it 10 years, and they'll go back to thinking of us as the friendly, peaceful humans who smile and pour tea." "Will we let them?" someone asked. There was silence. Then a civilian official, someone from Earth's intelligence service, spoke up. "Yes, we'll let them forget. We'll go back to sending our diplomatic ships and our cultural ambassadors. We'll attend their parties and sign their treaties. And in the shadows, we'll continue to do what needs to be done." "Without oversight?" the admiral asked. "Without anyone holding us accountable." "We hold ourselves accountable," the official replied. "That's the burden we carry. We do terrible things so that civilized species can remain civilized. We become monsters so others don't have to." Back on the council station, Ambassador Chun sat in her quarters and poured herself a drink. She thought about the ships that wouldn't return. She thought about the crews who had followed her orders without question. She thought about the swarm worlds she had ordered sterilized, the billions of swarm creatures that had died. She thought about the galaxy she had helped save, her secure terminal chimed. A new message from Phantom Command. There was a warlord in the fringe territories, someone taking advantage of post-war chaos. The council would debate what to do about it for months. Chung finished her drink and sent a coded reply. Protocol 7 was reauthorized.